Hello, everyone. Welcome to our first episode. I'm Katherine Moser.
And I'm Samuel Shearer.
And we're your hosts for always another Pottercast, yet another Pottercast.
Yes, indeed.
So just by way of introduction, we thought we might take a second and just introduce ourselves. As I said, I'm Katherine Moser, and I am hailing from Dallas, Texas. And I have been a Harry Potter fan since I was about 11. And so, Sam, tell us about you.
Oh, hello. My name is Samuel, and I hail from London, England. And I've been pretty obsessed with Harry Potter since I was about 9, which is roughly the same time as you, because you're a little bit older than me. So,
Yes, all right, just rub that in.
Ha ha ha.
So just in case anyone listening didn't know, we're cousins and we're best friends. And so that's how we decided to start this podcast, because also #quarantine life.
For real.
We don't have much else to do. So
because isolation and quarantine transcends international boundaries. So
also Sam's hatred for, making me happy also translates into never coming to see me. But
in my defense, I presently can't come and visit you because your president doesn't allow people from other countries in Europe, to come to your country.
Well, he's not to our country, so we'll.
Our borders are still open, so you could come visit me. But
this just got so political. Oh no.
Anyway, should we talk about Harry Potter?
So yes. So Sam, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you first started reading Harry Potter, and then I will share my story about
that. My mother had heard that they were good and wanted to read. Say they were good. Only the first one had come out, maybe the second one as well. I don't know. And so she started reading it and loved it so much that she said to me, "You must read it. You must read it. You must read it." And I was at that age where I had been told by the other kids at school that reading was for losers. So I was like, "No, I don't want to. Reading's terrible." And so she said, "Why don't I read it to you?" And I was like, "Fine then, entertain me." And so she did, and boy, did she ever. And so then I remember snatching the book out of her hand and saying, "You're reading too slowly. I need to know what happens." And so then I continued to read and got them the day that they came out for every subsequent book and devoured them as quickly as possible.
Amazing. Yes. So my experience with Harry Potter was a little different. As I mentioned, I'm from Texas, and that's a pretty conservative state. And I grew up and still most definitely am a very committed Christian. And I was also homeschooled. Now, that's probably going to put an image in your head of a Christian Texas homeschool person. Oh, no.
So many socks and sandals. So many socks being worn underneath sandals.
So much denim. No.
Oh, so much denim. And braids. So many braids.
Oh, and no fashion sense at all. It was terrible. But I will say my family is very middle of the road. We are not a particularly conservative family, not a particularly liberal family. We're very middle of the road. Anyway, the Christian homeschool bubble that I grew up in at the time, the only news I ever heard about Harry Potter was that it was about like witchcraft and Satan and like never let your kids read this because it's going to corrupt them and all of that. Now, my parents never told me that. I need to make that very clear. My parents never told me that. But that was just the only news I ever heard about Harry Potter was how terrible it was. But then I think I was about 11 or 12, and my sister checked out a copy of the first book from the library. And I found it, and I thought, oh, Mindy's reading this book? Maybe I should read it. And again, I have no idea why that was my rationale. Don't know why that was my line of thinking, but I read it and I was hooked. It's so good. And I immediately went and got the second book, and it was just as good. And the third book was just as good. And there I was. I was hooked.
If only the films got increasingly good as they went on too.
Yes, we are going to talk a little bit about the films as we go, because Sam was in the films.
Yes, I'm exceptionally talented. You're all very welcome.
It's true. He played a Hogwarts student. He was one of the extras, and he played several different Hogwarts students in the last 4, starting with Order of the Phoenix to the end. So
that's it. That's the one.
yes. So we will be talking a little bit about his experience there too, and maybe give you a little behind the scenes info.
But that's probably not until later, because obviously we're starting with the first book, and I wasn't in the first film. So
what a crying shame.
Well, I mean, those first films weren't great. Let's be honest. Then,
yeah, awesome.
I mean, the later ones, but we move on. We digress. We digress
again. And Sam, real quick, perhaps we ought to mention why it is that I'm American and you're British, even though we're cousins. How does that work?
Oh, so there's a thing called aeroplanes, and at one point, my American mother got on one with my English father, whom she had recently married, flew across the ocean and was like, well, the weather here is terrible. I think I'll stay.
That was exactly her line of reasoning.
And here I am, always cold, terrible teeth, very British. And there you remain, never cold, perfect teeth, very American.
It's so true. Well, shall we dive into chapter 1 of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone?
None of this sorcerer nonsense.
No. Now, we should mention for Americans such as myself, I did not read the Philosopher's Stone until I was an adult. So the reason...
Is the title changed because the word philosopher means something different in America?
I guess. I mean, philosopher does not make me think of anything magical at all.
Well, it doesn't make me think of anything magical. A philosopher is like Aristotle or Socrates, or someone who thinks big about the universe, not an alchemist who makes stones.
I think the term sorcerer's stone was probably meant to appeal to a larger audience and kind of draw them in a little bit more, because I would be... The title Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone kind of makes me think of just a little indie fledgling book, whereas Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone makes me think of a series that's really like draws me right in. I don't know.
Well, anywho, let's talk about the first line of this incredible book, which, by the way, I must have read so many times because I just opened up my book and my first page has fallen out.
Oh no!
It's just fallen out as I've opened my book.
Oh my
which
God.
Means that, I mean, I have read this. This is the copy I have in my hands is a first edition. It's the copy I got when I was 8.
Wow.
So I've had it for 12 years.
I bought mine.
Does that make sense?
In 2014.
No, 22 years. Yeah, 22 years. I'm 30, right?
You're about to.
Yeah, 22. So I've had this book in my hands for 22 years.
Wow, that's amazing.
Right, so I will hold the singular page in my hands then.
Hit us with the first sentence.
I will read you the first sentence. Mr. and Mrs. Dursley of number 4 Privet Drive were proud to say that they were perfectly normal. Thank you very much.
I love it.
It's so good.
Sam, we always say that the way to draw me into a book is if you have a good first sentence, you know the rest of the book is going to be a good read.
Yeah, if you can't draw me in with a first sentence, I might forgive you and let you draw me in with the first paragraph. But if you can't get me from the first paragraph, I'm almost certain you won't get me to the end of the first chapter.
Yeah. Maybe that's a little strict, a little harsh, but hey.
But there are so many books, and you need to weasel out the ones that you don't love.
Exactly.
Anyway, I just think it starts so well. The whole first, the first 4 or 5 pages until you actually meet the character of Harry Potter, who is, a cradle-bound pooping baby, so isn't even a real character.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's so good. It sets up how mundane and boring the human world is.
Mm-hmm. Now, I want to point out something about on the very first page, the description of Mr. and Mrs. Dursley. Really Mrs. Dursley, because I think in the films, Richard Griffiths, who played Mr. Dursley, he fits the description pretty well. But the way Mrs. Dursley is described is Mrs. Dursley was thin and blonde and had nearly twice the usual amount of neck, which came in very useful as she spent so much of her time craning over garden fences, spying on the neighbors. Now, that description in the book almost makes me think of like a Real Housewives almost type.
But it's supposed to, because what it's trying to do is give you an immediate sense of who she is as a person.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you were an English reader, you would read that character description and immediately think of kind of like the Real Housewives. But in England, it's supposed to be more of that's what she's trying to be like.
Mm-hmm.
So her hair is probably not naturally blonde.
Mm-hmm.
Her hair, and she is always craning over her fence to see what the neighbors are up to, because she's a busybody, because she wants to appear well loved and well respected in the neighborhood. But actually, she's just a regular lady.
I did think it was interesting, though, in the movies, Fiona Shaw is not blonde, and she was portrayed a little bit dowdy almost. Like she didn't really glam herself up. Whereas I kind of feel like in the books, Petunia Dursley would have kind of tried to come across as a bit of a glamorous housewife. Whereas...
So, interestingly, they glam her up a lot more in the later films. Don't forget, the first two films were directed by an American.
It's true. It's true.
And so it was British culture looked at through an American lens. And I know full well that Americans think that we're dowdy and boring, which is true in so many ways.
It's true. So another thing, Dudley, we don't actually get a description, we don't get a physical description of Dudley in this chapter, but it says the Dursleys had a small son called Dudley, and in their opinion, there was no finer boy anywhere, which immediately sets up, you know he's the worst kid ever. Because...
Oh, for real. And that it's their fault.
Yes, exactly.
Which also then highlights how they treat Harry, because they think that Dudley is the best kid in the world when Harry is actually like literally the best kid in the world. Like, because he's the boy who lived and he saved the world and then does it again. And they treat him like garbage. So
exactly. Now, I also thought it was interesting. So we follow through the chapter, we follow Mr. Dursley to work. And as he goes to work, he sees these people in cloaks, which is very mysterious and odd. And I love that Rowling just puts that detail in there, that who are these people in the cloaks and what are they doing and who cares? And I just, she puts these moments in, but she doesn't tell you the answer. She really draws you into the story. And so now we've gotten to work with Mr. Dursley, and I think it's very telling. It says, Mr. Dursley, however, had a perfectly normal owl-free morning. He yelled at 5 different people. He made several important telephone calls and shouted a bit more. He was in a very good mood until lunchtime. So that immediately tells you lots about his character. That he yells at people and just makes important phone calls and then is in a really good mood.
Yeah, I think it's a good description of him, and something I just love that it focuses so much on them for the first chapter. Because you're obviously a bit confused, because not only is there no mention of Harry, really, there's also no mention of the word Potter, and they're the Dursleys, so like it doesn't make any sense. And then obviously you're brought into the scene is being set. And
by the people in the cloaks. The people in the cloaks are the first one to mention, like the Potters. That's right. That's what I heard. Yes, their son Harry. And you're meant to wonder, how do these people know who Harry Potter is, and who is he, and what's going on?
I like, he was sure there were lots of people called Potter who had a son called Harry. Come to think of it, he wasn't even sure his nephew was called Harry. He'd never even seen the boy. It might have been Harvey or Harold. There was no point in worrying Mrs. Dursley. She always got so upset at any mention of her sister. He didn't blame her if he'd had a sister like that. But all the same, those people in the cloaks, the narrative voice is very clever, because it's a very good way of she narrates through It's an omniscient narrator with a limited emotional perspective of the character that is currently the focus of that moment.
Exactly.
She's very good at that. People always say that she's not a very good writer, and I don't know why they say that.
She's a brilliant writer. What are they talking about?
She's a brilliant writer, an incredible story craftsman as well, because like as we move on to the next few pages, when we get introduced to Albus Dumbledore and Minerva McGonagall.
Oh my gosh. Love that we get introduced to her as a cat before a
for
human.
real. And then it's like completely ignored for so long.
Mm-hmm.
Like they're like, oh, she's a cat. And then I think at like one point in the third book, she's like, oh, guess what? I'm a cat.
Right.
And then never again is
Right.
like it's not used to narrative effect ever again that she's a cat or is not a cat but can transfigure herself into a cat. So I love that you meet her as a cat, but it is one of the weaker. It's one of the moments that you realize that when she wrote this, she wasn't certain she'd ever get to a.
Right.
She hoped she would, but she didn't know that it would become popular and she would get to a seventh book because she just ignores the fact that she's a cat.
Right, exactly. Now, I want to point out really quick before we talk about Dumbledore and McGonagall, an Americanism for all you Americans who are obviously listening to this, because, you know, thousands of people must be.
And also, what better you got to do with your time? Come on, guys.
So on page 10, now, of course, this is a different edition, but on my edition, this is page 10. It says, Mrs. Dursley had had a nice, normal day. She told him over dinner all about Mrs. Next Door's problems with her daughter and how Dudley had learned a new word, shan't. In the American edition of this book, it is won't, which I think that's just I just love those little differences.
Yeah.
Point out every Americanism I spot or remember from Sorcerer's Stone. And I think that's the first one, which the two different words are shan't and won't. So continue with.
Is shan't not a word that you would use in America?
No one ever says that. That's a very British word. No one ever says the word shan't.
I mean, I can't say that I'm, dropping shan't bombs around. Like, I'm not like throwing them shants out there. But at the same time, it is like if I were to say shan't in a sentence here, no one would think anything of it.
Whereas if I were to say it, everyone would look at me like I was crazy. Like they would
or
know.
Or just super fancy.
Yes, everyone would look at me like why is she being so pretentious? Like,
But also like you are that fancy, so
I'm pretty fancy. No, I'm not. Okay.
No, she's really not. So yes, and then we meet Catgonagall, and then also this stresses me out. So for anyone who is listening who has read the Harry Potter books, frankly, which must be everyone, because why on earth would you be listening if you've not read Harry Potter? But I can't stand Dumbledore.
Oh.
I can't stand him. He's a bad man. He's a bad man. He's a great character. He is a great character, but he is a bad man.
He does things that aren't good, but I don't think he's a bad man. But
he leaves Harry in an abusive household.
But he doesn't know that they're going to treat him that badly.
Right. Right, but they keep an eye on him though. And 11 years of systematic domestic abuse, and he leaves him in that household.
Well, I don't know. I'm just saying. He did it again. He does things for the greater good, which isn't always a good thing. But he's a flawed character. He really is. I will agree all day.
He's a great character. I just Also, I seem to remember from last time we talked about this, that apparently sherbet lemons aren't a thing you have in America either.
Oh, goodness. Yes. Okay, so on page 13 of my edition, it says, we have much to be thankful for. Would you care for a sherbet lemon? A what? A sherbet lemon. They're a kind of muggle sweet I'm rather fond of. Now, first of all, Americans call those lemon drops, and we also never refer to them as sweets. We would say a kind of muggle candy. But interestingly, I don't believe the Sorcerer's Stone book says candy. I believe they keep the word sweet in there. So they say a lemon drop.
Well, because I think you would know what it was, though.
True.
if someone were to say it's a sweet, you would know that at least if you didn't know it was candy, you'd know that it was some kind of dessert food.
Yes. Now, real quick, I have to mention this because we're talking about lemon drops. I can't remember the last time I saw lemon drops in a grocery store. Now, also, I haven't been to a grocery store in many weeks. And even before all this nonsense, I didn't spend a whole lot of time on the candy aisle. But I feel like you can't buy lemon drops except in like an old-fashioned like general store, candy store, which are very prominent. That's a very real thing in the American South, by the way. But I may have done a little research on lemon drops just because I was fascinated and like I can't remember the last time I even saw lemon drops for sale anywhere. But apparently you can buy, there's a couple of brands that still make them and you can buy them in grocery stores. So Americans,
So they're still quite common here, but they're not candy. So like in the sense that, you know, if your children were asking you, "Mommy, can we have sweets?" you wouldn't say, "Sure, have a sherbet lemon," because they'd think that you don't love them. So it's definitely the type of candy that like everyone's great grandmother has in her purse.
Yeah.
But they are still very much a thing, and very, very much in the north of England as well. They'd still be very much because the American South and the English North are comparable as far as attitudes towards different things. So, like the English North is much more conservative, smaller communities, much more family focused, often more religiously inclined. And then the South in England is much more independent, certainly probably more of an international focus, more people from other countries, bigger cities, much more atheistic, liberal kind of sensibilities.
Interesting. That's crazy.
So it's the exact opposite of America. Anyway, that's completely irrelevant to what we're talking about, but
I don't know. When we started talking about lemon drops, I just thought, when was the last time I even saw a lemon drop anywhere for sale? Like if I wanted to buy them, where could I get
them? If I find some authentic old-fashioned English sherbet lemons, I will buy them and FedEx them to you.
You should definitely do that. Meanwhile, I will buy my cheap, terrible, cheap candy brand, whatever it is, and at Walmart and FedEx.
Or you could just not do that. Shelter in place.
So that was our next Americanism. So let's move on. Let me see if I have anything else in my notes here. Oh, okay. So this is where Dumbledore sets up, "My dear professor, surely a sensible person like yourself can call him by his name. All this you-know-who nonsense. For 11 years, I have been trying to persuade people to call him by his proper name, Voldemort." Now, before we talk about anything else, let's talk about the pronunciation of Voldemort, because I have been pronouncing it Voldemort, which is the French. I think Rowling at one point said that's how you were supposed to pronounce it because of the French connotation of more. The T is silent and more means death.
I think she's wrong, though.
Yes, and I think she took it back and explained your reasoning for Voldemort.
So the reason I think it's Voldemort is because I am Lord Voldemort is an anagram of Tom Marvolo Riddle, which is his Muggle name. And the T in Tom is not silent, so putting at the end of Voldemort his name is an Marvolo Riddle. And so because it's an anagram and not an actual French word, it's a complete coincidence that it's got the word death in it.
Yes.
Yeah.
So for the purposes of our podcast, it's Voldemort.
Yes. Well, not just for the purposes of our podcast, but for all you people out there. If you're pronouncing it Voldemort, stop.
Fine. I'm with you people. But anyway.
And then what else was there? Oh, and then Hagrid. Come now. And then Hagrid appears.
Bless him. Well, so Dumbledore and McGonagall talk about rumors that are flying around, which is that James and Lily Potter are dead and that Harry is not, and that Voldemort is gone. So these are the rumors, kind of the 3 rumors that are flying around. And Dumbledore confirms all of them. That Voldemort is gone, and Lily and James are dead, and Harry survived somehow. And then they see Hagrid flying him in on Sirius Black's motorcycle, which also another Americanism. In the Sorcerer's Stone, it's called motorcycle. Here, it's called motorbike.
Yeah, because it's a motorbike. That's what it is.
I'm just saying, I agree, but in Sorcerer's Stone, it's a motorcycle.
Yeah, and I love that, like, so Sirius Black, and you're like, meh, whatever, don't really think anything of it. And then in the 3rd book, you're like, oh, hold the phone.
Exactly. It's just brilliant the way she sets up. And there's, who's that guy? Daedalus Diggle? Is that how you say his name?
Oh yeah, who you don't really hear or know anything about for another like 100 years.
Exactly. But she sprinkles in these names and these these little story tidbits that she sprinkles in, and you don't know what they mean, and then they come back all throughout the series. So here's Hagrid, and he is an enormous man.
and yet somehow very childlike and adorable.
Yes, I think yes, he's adorable. Okay, very quickly. So they get out Harry, and they see, it says, inside, just visible, was a baby boy fast asleep. Under a tuft of jet black hair over his forehead, they could see a curiously shaped cut, like a bolt of lightning. And then Dumbledore says, yes, he'll have that scar forever. And then Minerva McGonagall says, couldn't you do something about it, Dumbledore? And then he says, even if I could, I wouldn't. Scars can come in useful. I have one myself above my left knee, which is a perfect map of the London Underground. I just love that little detail.
Yeah, which again is just never explained, and no one. But who cares? It doesn't matter.
But I think it's perfect. Like just the little whimsical details, the childlike, little bits of humor that Rowling sprinkles in for her audience, I think is great.
Yeah.
And I love, when Hagrid hands over Harry to Dumbledore, and he starts crying and he's really sad, and he kisses Harry goodbye, and it's so sweet. Like, I just love Hagrid's tender heart under this, giant, like wild kind of mountain, well, not mountain, but kind of wild, like, I don't know, but I just love Hagrid's heart.
Yeah. I'm also noticing as well, I totally forgot that because she hadn't really figured what she was going to use it for in the later books, that the Deluminator is called a put-outer in this first chapter because it puts out the lights.
Yeah.
But I guess at this point she was like, oh, well, I guess the audience don't know what it is, so what does it matter if I call it this? And then later down the line, she was like, put-outer? No.
Yeah.
That's not okay. Sounds wildly inappropriate.
It's a little detail for her young audience who, they would understand what a put-outer is, and they wouldn't know what a Deluminator is. So
that's true. That's very true.
She's really meeting her audience right where they are. And another way she's doing that is by introducing us to this magical world through the eyes of the Dursleys, who are very mundane and normal and know things that we can understand. So she introduces us to her universe in ways that we can understand, and then just introduces little tidbits along the way so that we can get it.
Ugh, and then that closing paragraph of the first chapter is just so beautiful.
Why don't you read it for us, and we'll finish with that.
Ugh. Okay. A breeze ruffled the neat hedges of Privet Drive, which lay silent and tidy under the inky sky, the very last place you would expect astonishing things to happen. Harry Potter rolled over inside his blankets without waking up. One small hand closed on the letter beside him, and he slept on, not knowing he was special, not knowing he was famous, not knowing he would be woken in a few hours' time by Mrs. Dursley's scream as she opened the front door to put out the milk bottles, nor that he would spend the next few weeks being prodded and pinched by his cousin Dudley. He couldn't know that at this very moment, people meeting in secret all over the country were holding up their glasses and saying in hushed voices, "To Harry Potter, the boy who lived."
Oh, it's amazing.
It's so good. And I also very much feel like that first chapter could be a self-enclosed short story.
It could. It really could. There's so much going on in it. Well, everyone, that was chapter 1, The Boy Who Lived.
And don't worry, in future episodes, we will talk about 4 or 5 chapters at a time, not just one.
We won't quite deep dive so much on these, but join us the next time for chapters 2, 3, and 4. We will look forward to seeing you all then.
Bye.